This episode of Gators Breakdown is brought to you by UFM Underwear. Head to ufmunderwear.com and use promo code BREAKDOWN for $5 off your purchase. UFM Underwear. Support your manhood. The Gators Breakdown podcast is ready to go. I'm your host, David Waters, and you can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SCC. Joining me this episode is Will Miles from his site, readandreaction.com, and you can find him on Twitter at WillMilesSCC. Will, this is part 2 of the Gators opponent previews, FSU, Miami, where the previous one with Mark Rogers. And this episode, you and I will get into the SEC opponents for the Gators, and the kind of part 1 of the SEC look is Kentucky, Tennessee, Auburn, and LSU. 3 of those were bowl teams from a season ago.
Yeah, man, and obviously Florida has something to prove against Kentucky, and Tennessee maybe or maybe isn't a rival, depending upon who you ask. And then certainly Auburn is one of those that we always look forward to when we get that West exchange. And then LSU's really become bitter the last few years. So with the Hurricanes and Joe Oliva and all that sort of stuff. So a fun stretch. And I mean, just like every year, right? The SEC is always a gauntlet. You look at it and you say, yeah, there's a chance you could lose this game. But always interesting to take a look at and excited to get started.
Yeah, absolutely. And before we get there, remember you can find Gators Breakdown on news4jax.com/Gators Breakdown. You'll find all the Gators Breakdown episodes there, as well as Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, and YouTube. When using those services, please share, rate, and review the show, and follow us on social media, Twitter and Facebook at Gators Breakdown. Don't forget, coming up August 17th, Gators Breakdown kickoff party, a week before Florida-Miami kick off the season. Free admission. You will have to pay for food and drinks. RSVPs out there on Twitter. And if you don't have Twitter, reach out to me at GatorsBreakdown@gmail.com if you want to go. And also get your Gators Breakdown gear at squadlocker.com. Head over there, click in the top right of the screen, click on Find Your Store, type in Gators Breakdown, and all the gear is available right there. Hat, shirts, polos, and more at Squad Locker. So Will, when we go look at these preseason magazines when they come out in May, I say it every year. I'm a big proponent of the what the opposing coaches have to say about each team. So I'll do these for the opponents too that the Gators are facing, and starting. I'm kind of gonna go in the order of in order of the schedule when Florida plays these teams here. So Kentucky, of course, is the first SEC opponent for the Gators this year. And according to Athlon, opposing coaches size up Kentucky. Here they go. Tons of questions. Maybe the team that will look the most different on both sides this season. They lose a ton on defense. You don't replace a Josh Allen at Alabama, and you sure as hell don't at Kentucky. He was the best edge rusher in the game. Their secondary is basically starting over. The good news is that it's a line of scrimmage league, and they're really solid on both offense and defensive lines. They get their left tackle, Landon Young, back from an ACL tear. He's their all-time, he'll be a huge asset. I'd worry more about the offense. The needs are obvious. Losing Benny Snell is a huge blow. He's their all-time yards guy, but they've got a stable behind Snell of faster, more dynamic guys, not grinders. Eddie Gran will have to go back to that Cincinnati stuff, spreading the ball around, going faster, but they have to get more efficient quarterback play. Terry Wilson can run like a scalded dog, but he's got to improve throwing the ball on third down. It's hard to keep up with this. The font's really small here. That he better execution and passing and receiving. They won't have the defense to bail out on short drives. They're going to fall back some this year because of how good the league is. But I think Mark Stoops has done a great job, even if they end up 500 this season. They're still going in the right direction. They're just not a reload team. They're going to need more than 1 year to build, but Stoops has them in a really nice spot. They're putting a lot of inroads in Kentucky recruiting. They've been living in Ohio, but after last season, they can push farther south and get interest from kids. If they can translate last season into recruiting, they'll be back playing those New Year Day bowls in a year or two. I'll get to Lindy's here in just a second, Will, but it is funny that Coach mentions recruiting and coming south, and Florida is stole 3 of Kentucky's recruits. So,
just like all the time, man. Kentucky sits somewhere between 30th and 35th, and Florida is hopefully a top 10 recruiting team. So, if that's how you got to get there, that's how you got to get there.
Yep, and so Lindy's here on this, a short, more brief to hear from them. On the coming up season, the guy that does the best job coaching in the East is Mark Stoops. He has a load of talent, so he's going to have his work cut out for him. They don't have a dynamic running back coming back. They don't have a dynamic quarterback coming back. Don't have a great receiver. And then another coach, more on this season, they ain't replacing those three defensive guys, Josh Allen, Mike Edwards, Jordan Jones. They were difference makers. They're going to go back to being Kentucky. But Mark did a hell of a job. If they win 10 every 4 years, that's a good job. You just don't want to go back to 4-8. If you go 6-6 and get a bowl game and win that, that's still good football for Kentucky. And I think Kentucky people understand that. And let's face it, his name is not Calipari. He's not finding 5 stars to replace those guys. So, Will, there some belief in Mark Stoops and what he does, and some, saying that it's hard to keep that up at Kentucky. Last season was great in Lexington. Before the Wildcats went 10-3 last year, the program had twice as many 10-loss seasons as 10-win campaigns in its history. So, they were on their way to the best record in 41 years. They finally beat Florida after a 31-game losing streak. Benny Snell, Josh Allen, they became household names. Snell left the all-time leading rusher. Allen walked away with, sack artist in school history, swept every National Defensive Player of the Year award last year. They're going to miss those guys. They're going to miss Snell, who ran for 3,800 yards and 48 touchdowns in his career. Allen, 17 sacks last season, now playing here in Jacksonville for the Jaguars. He had 31.5 sacks for his career. So the question does become for 2019, how does Kentucky respond by losing those type of players and keep up in the SEC East? And I might be too harsh on them, but I do see a drop off somewhat for what they were able to do last season, but not. I don't see a big one. While he had a pretty good game against Florida, Terry Wilson still a major question mark at quarterback. Maybe they'll prove me wrong again because I didn't think Kentucky was going to be as good as they were last season. I picked them 4th in the SEC East back at SEC Media Days, but I probably would have picked them behind South Carolina as far as power ranking goes, but South Carolina's schedule is just too much.
Yeah, I mean, so last year Kentucky went 10-3, and they had 346 points for, which when you compare to Florida had 455. So the offenses really weren't even in comparison, but their defense gave up 219. So I think if you look at the strength of Kentucky's team last year, it was clearly the defense with Josh Allen, and the write-ups that you had mentioned, the returning starters, they've only got 4 guys returning on the defensive side of the ball. I think that's really where people sort of then project that Kentucky isn't necessarily going to be as good this year because they're losing all that stuff on the defense, and the defense is really what kept them in games. And they went 3-1 in one-score games last year, and really 4-1 if you count the Florida game because that fumble that was returned at the end other than that, it would have been a 1-score game as well. And, you don't typically go 4-1 in those games. You go 2-3 or 3-2. And if they do that, then it's a less successful season anyway. So I think they sort of outplayed their talent last year in some capacity. And I think that was sort of reflected in the rankings and the bowl games and just sort of where they were positioned relative to Florida, even though they beat Florida. And then, with a lot of those guys leaving and like you said, they're not necessarily going to reload. This is a rebuild type of program. Stoops is a pretty good coach, but, at the end of the day, you got to have the horses, and they don't. Last year was a very senior, heavy laden team, and Wilson played reasonably well. His yards above replacement was .09, but you lose Benny Snell, and that's a pretty significant loss.
Absolutely. If we go back to the offense, mentioned earlier that they have to get better play from Wilson, as you just kind of alluded to, and they may if he's healthy. He only threw for almost 1,900 yards last year, 11 touchdowns. Completion percentage, not too bad, 67.2, only 8 interceptions, so just not a lot of, reward and some risk involved there. He's a major threat as a runner, 547 yards and 4 scores on the ground. Really hurt Florida there as we know. But he did have a leg injury in week 4 that didn't really fully heal until later in the season. You kind of alluded to this. 3 of the top 4 receivers are done. Lynn Bowden is back. 67 passes caught last year for 745 yards, 5 touchdowns. no question he's the number one target. And he might get the ball in multiple ways, too, to kind of help that Kentucky offense. So Josh Ali, maybe another guy who's ready to do more there. Second relieving receiver, CJ Conrad. He's done at tight end. Justin Riggs is probably a guy that they'll fill in there. But, yeah, I mean, Terry Wilson really, if he could put what we saw in the Florida game together he had good plays in that game, but it still wasn't that great game. But if he can put those type of plays together for one game and then that game after game, then, we said it many a times, a quarterback can change the game when the talent around him is not up to par. And for Kentucky, it's probably not. But with Eddie Grant at OC, if he can find some magic with Terry Wilson, then they may not drop off all that much.
Yeah, I mean, a quarterback obviously can cover a multitude of sins. I would say that their offensive line was pretty decent last year, and they're returning three guys: Drake Jackson at center, Logan Sternberg at left guard, and Landon Young at left tackle. So that makes a difference. Wilson played okay, but I think we also have to look at the circumstances in terms of how he played against Florida. I mean, Florida obviously implementing a new defense. They didn't have Reese on the field. I don't believe they had CeCe Jefferson on the field either.
Right. Marco Wilson goes down.
Marco Wilson goes down, so now you're bringing in young guys off the bench. Now, again, that could happen this year too, because the defensive backs are pretty thin. If you lose one of those defensive backs to an injury, then obviously you're bringing in somebody young like Kyrie Elam or Chester Kimbrough or somebody like that. But at the same time, you also have the combination of the injuries and the suspensions and all that sort of stuff, and then also Snell. And that, I think, is the differentiating factor, right? So last year, Kentucky was 91st in yards per pass against FBS teams. They were 37th in yards per rush, and we saw that against Florida. I mean, Snell ran wild in that entire game. Florida couldn't stop it. They brought their safeties up, and then Wilson was able to hit long passes behind those safeties, especially early in the game. And those are the types of things that you're not going to be able to do if you don't have that running game. And we see this all the time. If you can't run the ball and you're playing a read option type offense and you can just focus on the quarterback's going to get killed. So, I think obviously they're going to rely on Wilson. The thing you got to wonder is, with three of the four top receivers, with Conrad gone, with some questions on the offensive line. Landon Young was hurt a lot last year. How do you are you going to be able to move the ball relying on Wilson as opposed to him being a complementary piece? I understand why people doubt Kentucky on offense. That makes some sense. The other thing I think that we should take into account is that they are going to be playing Toledo and Eastern Michigan before they come in, and Florida will have already played Miami. And so in terms of being battle tested coming into this game, I think Florida will already know who they are, and Kentucky will sort of be still trying to figure that out. I think that makes a difference when it comes to sort of getting your sea legs under you. All of a sudden you get hit by somebody, and Florida will have already played a team with pretty decent speed. Kentucky will finally be playing that third game of the year, so I think that can make a difference too.
Yeah, not only that, Florida will have a big game and a bye week and a cupcake before Kentucky.
Hey man, it's a good way to open up the SEC season. That's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Move to the other side of the ball, Will. They lose 5 multi-year starters in the defensive backfield. Mike Edwards, 44 starts. Derek Beatty, 41 starts. Chris Restry, 34 starts. Darius West, 24 starts. Lonnie Johnson, 18 starts. Those 5 guys, here we go, combined 853 tackles, 80 pass breakups, 24 interceptions. Add up all the interceptions last year by returning defensive backs, and you get 1. So the Wildcats were hoping junior Devante Robinson was going to be ready for a starting role this year. He suffered an injury. He'll be out for the season. He played in all 26 games the past 2 seasons for the Wildcats, including first 3 starts of his career in 2018. 42 tackles, 3 tackles for loss, 4 pass breakups, 2 fumble recoveries last season. And one of those fumbles was the 30-yard touchdown to seal the game versus Florida last year. So one guy who who made plays against Florida last year, who they were really counting on, is not going to be on the field. 7 starters and 4 of the top 5 tacklers are gone from this defense. As you mentioned earlier, 338 yards per game, 16.8 points per game. Brought up everything they lose on the back end, but Kentucky will be strong up front. Big boys on the defensive line, SEC defensive line here, and with tons of experience. 6'9", 310-pound Calvin Taylor, he's a senior, 49 tackles there, 7 for a loss. 6'4", 289-pound senior TJ Carter, 6'4", 361-pound junior Quentin Bohanna. He's 30 tackles there, 4 for loss. 6'5", 306-pound senior Phil Hoskins. Plus Marquand McCall, who got some quality reps as a freshman, former 4-star recruit, and a star I think they're kind of waiting on is Josh Pascal, 6'3", 284. So he returned late last season. He weird, skin cancer on his foot. It was an injury that he missed some time with there. So, many are saying that this is Stoops' best defensive line yet in Kentucky, and looking at the size and the experience and production that they bring back, that kind of backs it up. They do lose Josh Allen, of course, and we've mentioned his stats and how important he was. Jordan Jones as well. And, so Cash Daniel there at middle linebacker, we all remember him after the Florida game last year doing the Stone Cold Steve Austin with the water bottles there after the game. Played a lot last year with a cast on his hand. He's a tough-nosed player with a broken left hand last year, but still had 84 tackles, 7.5 for a loss. So, they lose their star, but we've mentioned time and time again on this podcast, especially in the SEC, if you're strong up front, then you're probably going to be strong on defense.
Yeah, I mean, certainly the defensive line makes a difference. Bohanna made some pretty big plays last year in the Florida game and really made a difference there up front. But let's be honest. Like when you've got a guy like Josh Allen and the offense has to account for him, it opens everybody else up. The guy had 17 sacks and 21.5 tackles for loss. There's a reason he was a top 10 pick in the NFL draft. And no one else on Kentucky's team had more than 5 sacks last year. So when we look at the defense and how it performed, really you're looking at Allen, and they were okay. They weren't great. They were 32nd in yards per play overall, 32nd in yards per pass, and 48th in yards per rush. So they were a good defense. They weren't necessarily great. And I think this is where that record in one-score games I mentioned earlier really sort of plays a role. If they'd have gone 2-2 in those games, or if they'd have gone 1-3 in those games, our perception as to how good Kentucky was would have been very, very different. I think they were a below average offensive team. I think they were a slightly above average defensive team, and they had a little bit of luck and were able to pull out a few games that maybe they wouldn't always pull out. And, they're not going to go 0-4 in those games this year, but you figure they go 2-2 and, they don't have quite as much talent. So, I look at the loss of Allen as being a major, major deal, regardless of who they've got up front. And the fact that they have to replace all that talent in the defensive backfield as well. You're going to be able to get your shots, and you're going to have some guys who are open just because of miscommunications and lack of experience. And, obviously Florida's going to have to take advantage of that.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that too. Kind of going back to your point you made just a second ago is, hey, they're not going to be tested before this Florida game. And with that inexperienced secondary, Florida will be their first test. So you could kind of look for Dan Mullen to maybe take advantage there. All right, let's keep on moving to Big Orange of Tennessee. They'll visit Gainesville as well. The last 2 matchups in Gainesville have been, for memory books. The Greer to Callaway, and then the Hail Mary from Franks to Cleveland there. So last 2 times Tennessee's been to Gainesville, they've been to barn burners and going down to the wire. Let's take a look at what some coaches had to say about Tennessee. First in Athlon, they say expect more consistent play on offense this season. Jarrett Garantano is a longtime starter who has been through it with that program. Combine him with Jim Chaney, a veteran play caller who knows the program and the roster, and the second year of Jeremy Pruitt's culture should be better. The standout position group here is that wide receiver. Marquez Callaway, Josh Palmer should help them build something on the outside. Juwan Jennings coming back is big. They have a lot of athleticism on offense. They just didn't know how to utilize their skill guys. There is no reason that offense was so bad last year. I know the line wasn't good, but they have players. Secondary is an obvious strength. They were playing freshman corners last year, and those guys are back. They're running a lot of stuff out of nickel too, so they'll be able to do even more this year. Their best group on defense by far. Butch Jones, and this is interesting here. Butch Jones did a better job recruiting than what they're telling the media. The players he brought in are still playing the bulk of the time, and not a lot of Pruitt's recruits have broken past them on the depth chart, though that could change this year. They've recruited so well so far for the system Jeremy wants. They need to get a bowl. They need to get to a bowl this year and beat Vanderbilt and Missouri and the conference teams who aren't as talented on their rosters. Just show the plan is working long term. That and Jeremy needs to let Chaney make him look good. Chaney was their best ad in recruiting. And then Lindy says on the future, Tennessee needs a talent upgrade. It's going to take 5 years to get it done. I think Jeremy Pruitt will get it done because he's a good enough coach and recruiter to get it done, but it will take that long. The reason is there's other people in the league already getting it done, and they have no margin for error because they play Alabama, Georgia, and Florida every year. On last season, the question is, why did they finish so poorly last year? They played like crap down the stretch against Missouri and Vanderbilt. They lost 3 in a row now to Vanderbilt. That's unacceptable. And on new offensive coordinator, Jeremy lucked out getting rid of Tyson Helton and hiring Jim Chaney. I think he's the best, most proven offensive coordinator in the league. I think Jim is outstanding. If Jeremy will leave him alone, Jim will be just fine. So, well, going back to that recruiting thing and talent overall for Tennessee, it's a lot like Florida, too, and we've noticed. And, of course, it's going to be this way for a lot of coaches that are in their second years. The previous coaches' players are still going to make up the bulk of the roster. But you do have some transfers at Florida who's made some differences here with Grimes and Jefferson and Grenard coming up this year. But it's still interesting that, what you saw Dan Mullen able to do in year one and get 10 wins, and Tennessee still kind of floundering and finding their way. When you look at a lot of comparisons on talent, and a lot of people say Florida and Tennessee have been pretty even the last, 4 or 5 years recruiting cycle.
Absolutely, they have been. So I mean, that was really my biggest question that I had written down coming in. It was they've recruited well. What the hell happened? Like, why are they having so many problems? They've averaged the 16th best class nationally over the last 4 years, and they've been 7.3 in conference, which tells you a little something, right? You would expect them to be in the middle of the conference, but you wouldn't expect them to go 5-7 and be losing to Vanderbilt. And they earned that 5-7 record last year, so they were outscored. They had 273 points for, 335 against, and you'd predict that to be 4.8 wins in a 12-win schedule. So them going 5-7 or 12-game schedule. So them going 5-7, not a real big surprise. I haven't been a real big Jim Chaney fan with some of the things that he's done while he's been at Georgia and some other things. So I'm interested to see whether he's able to take some of the deficiencies that Tennessee had on offense last year. I think it's probably a bad sign when you're replacing your offensive coordinator after the first year. Even if you think you can upgrade, and you would hope that you've hired the guy you need to run things right away.
Charlie Weiss.
Well, and I also think Pruitt's a defensive guy, and if you look at their defense, and we'll get into the numbers, but if you look at their defense, they weren't that great either. I mean, so I think last year at Florida, you say, hey, what we wanted to see was the offense get better, and Grantham improving the defense was really sort of a cherry on top and led to those 10 wins. I'm not sure Tennessee got that much better on either side of the ball last year under Pruitt. I think that's kind of the red flag if you're a fan of that program is, what's the mark? Like, where's his thumbprint? I mean, if he's a defensive guy, you would expect to see defensive progress, and I'm not sure they necessarily saw that.
Yeah, the offense finished, the other side of the ball, of course, where they are making that change, finished last in the SEC in yards, 326 yards per game, last in passing efficiency, last in rushing. Tennessee being last in rushing in the SEC for their history and what they've known for, yeah, there's something wrong. There's no pop, there's no explosion, stalled way too much. They only managed more than 24 points just once against an FBS team, Will. And they do get everybody back, but is that a good thing, or we'll have to kind of see here. And the reason I asked that here, going down the scores here, beat 40-14 by West Virginia, 47-21 by Florida, 38-21 by Georgia, 58-21 by Alabama, 50-17 by Missouri, and 38-13 by Vanderbilt. Couple nice wins versus Auburn and Kentucky. But my question is how to close the gap after getting blown out so many times last season. 9 wins in the last 2 seasons, lowest combined total for Tennessee on back-to-back years since 77-78. Is it a good thing so many parts return?
I think you would have said the same thing about Florida from 2017 to 2018, right? That there's a lot of experience coming back. In fact, I probably said this directly, that there's a lot of experience coming back, but they haven't necessarily proven anything yet. And again, we talked about it with Wilson. It's the same thing with Guarantano. I mean, if the quarterback takes a major step forward, it can cover up a bunch of your holes. The problem last year was they couldn't block anybody. I mean, they were 105th in yards per rush against FBS opponents. And if you go back and look at the film of them against West Virginia, the offensive line just got blown up the whole game. And the same thing happened when they played Florida. I mean, I was at that game. I mean, they were trying to run the ball out of the end zone and got stuffed for a safety. You don't usually see safeties on running plays, but they were able to do that. And then sort of a comedy of errors in that game against Florida as well. It just sort of snowballed. I'm not necessarily. I mean, Florida played well, obviously, but I'm not sure that. If you ask me, I mean, that game was 28-7 or 28-3. In the blink of an eye, based on a bunch of turnovers and stupid plays and things like that. I mean, Pruitt was over on the sidelines kicking dry erase boards and all sorts of stuff. I think where is the stamp, right? And that's going to be the question: is can Chaney put his stamp on the offense, because there was no stamp last year?
Yeah, and I think if you go and look at that offensive line, a lot of experience returns. 2 true freshmen and a transfer will kind of make this unit look a little different. Early enrollee Wanya Morris, a 5-star recruit. He's probably going to be starting at left tackle. 5-star freshman Darnell Wright. He's a summer enrollee. He has a good chance to get into the starting rotation as well, but maybe at right tackle. Alabama transfer Brandon Kennedy will be back, likely becomes his starting role at center after missing almost all of last season with a torn ACL. Guard spots are a little trickier for them. Trey Smith, he's got to get healthy there with issues with blood clots. Hopefully they can figure out and get him back on the field just for the sake of getting a guy who really wants to play the game of football out there. And you don't want to see injuries out there. So and another worry there, and just in this first week of fall camp, they lose guard Nathan Niehaus, who's retiring from football after he took part in the team's first 4 practices and recently announced that he's going to retire from the game. For all the wear and tear on his body. So he was expected to compete for a starting role as he was moving around between tackle and guard, mostly on the right side there. But that group has to get better for the sake of keeping quarterback Jarrett Guarantano. Is it Guarantano? Guarantano? I don't know. Here we go. I hear it said different all the time, but here we go. Guarantano. There we go. They got to keep him upright and healthy. Took beatings every week, sustained injuries that took him out of games 4 times last season, Will. He did hit 62% of his passes, a modest, 1,900 yards, 12 scores, only 3 picks. So not really a lot of risk, not a lot of reward either from him. And, Chaney helps him, I think, to a point, but so much of that is dependent on the offensive line. Finished last in the SEC in yards, 326 yards per game. As we mentioned, last in passing efficiency, last in rushing, only managed more than 24 points against FBS opponents again. So, I mean, that's it's just crazy for Tennessee. I like a lot of the skill talent that they have. And, we know as Gator fans just how much a poor offensive line can hold skill players back. So, got, 3 known quantities at receiver, Jawan Jennings, Marquez Callaway, the tight end Dominic Wood-Anderson there. And Jennings coming back after a knee injury from last month, I believe. He needed surgery on that. Should be back by the time the season comes around. But, Will, and you mentioned it too, and I say it's hard to fathom Tennessee, the SEC's worst rush game, 129 yards per game, 3.7 yards per carry.
Yeah, I mean, it was just awful. And you see that as well if you look at the quarterback rush yards. So Guarantano had 40 rushes for negative 94 yards, which means he was getting hit behind the line of scrimmage because that has a bunch of sack numbers involved, incorporated in it too. He was okay throwing the ball through the air. He averaged 7.8 yards per attempt. So really sort of on par with Felipe Franks, but Franks obviously had, almost 400 yards worth of rushing, and Guarantano didn't bring much of that at all to the table. And so what you wound up with was below average quarterback play, an offensive line that couldn't block for the running game, and no real standout running back either. And at that point, it's just a disaster. And and then when you factor in the turnovers and things like that against teams like Florida, you're going to get blown out a lot. So, again, where's the thumbprint that Chaney can bring? What do you look at from his time as an offensive coordinator and say, oh, this is what he's going to improve? You got to hope it's the running game if you're Tennessee, because that has to get better.
I mean, and we already know just by looking at it, and he was able to take advantage of talent he had at Georgia. he's not going to have that talent at Tennessee. So what can he come up with that will make that offense hum? Like I do think he's probably an improvement there. I think what he does, his history with quarterbacks, and what he's done previously, I think speaks that he will improve the offense. But that offensive line is a worry, and I think it's just a question of how much he can improve that offense.
Well, and it's baby steps, right? I mean, they went 5-7 last year. If they go 6-6 or 7-5 this year, I think you call that a success. But again, I go back to I'm very much interested in process when you're a team that's trying to build. And so last year, they go 5-7, but were things being done the right way? Well, the fact that you're replacing your offensive coordinator after 1 year says, maybe you made a wrong choice when you first started that. The fact that you've recruited as well as you have and you're still going 5-7, I think says something about the previous coaching regime, but also something about development skills and your ability to identify good players and put them in a position to succeed. And certainly there's been some attrition and some transfers and some injuries and all those sorts of things, but end of the day, there are no excuses in the SEC, and they're going to have to make hay with what they've got. And Tennessee should be better than Vanderbilt. Tennessee should be better than Kentucky. Tennessee should at least be on par with South Carolina, and for their fan base, I think that's what they should expect out of Pruitt. Like, they should be competitive with South Carolina and better than Kentucky and Vanderbilt. And if they don't get that done this year, then I think that's a disappointment.
Let's move to the other side of the ball with no position group more unsettled after all three starters in 2018 are gone. And now recently, senior Emmett Gooden, who would have started in the middle, tore his ACL early in camp. Junior Matthew Butler, he won a starting job this spring. Deep rotation that leaves probably heavily on newcomers there, something you don't want in the SEC. Kind of opposite of what we were kind of just discussing about Kentucky. They're still waiting. Michigan transfer Aubrey Solomon, he'll be a star, but they're still waiting on the NCAA clearance there. Linebacker Darren Kirkland Jr. Retirement leaves a hole in the middle. Tennessee's had a lot of players retire lately in recent years, so hopefully things can get figured out along those lines there. Hoping incoming freshman, they got 5-star Quavarius Crouch there, and Henry Toyota can help fill that, but it's probably going to take some time. They just need some more experience there on the defensive side of the ball. Cornerback, early impact from 2 freshmen last year, Bryce Thompson, Alontae Taylor. Most of the year, they proved themselves as strength of the defense. Both were healthy, had good springs. I think Tennessee's really looking at them blossoming into stars. Buchanan, Warren Burrell back there at safety to get some depth there, or back in the secondary. But the group's kind of thin behind their proven guys who got a lot of experience last year. Nigel Warrior at safety, I like that kid a lot. He's solid. But the freshman Jalen McCullough, he'll probably push for playing time. I know they were high on him coming out of spring or early parts of summer camp. 6 of the top 8 tacklers are back, so enough overall talent to improve after a decent year, allowing 377 yards and 28 points on the season, Will.
Yeah, and, so 2 years ago, Tennessee was 122nd in yards per rush against. They were 54th in yards per pass. Well, last year that flipped. They were 102nd in yards per pass allowed and 54th in yards per rush. And now they're losing their entire defensive line. So that's going to be an issue. And for a team like Florida, where the Gators are breaking in an offensive line that's relatively young, I think the fact that, you mentioned Kentucky having a very strong defensive line, well, Tennessee's not going to have that, and so I think that really sort of plays into Florida's hands and the ability to be able to take advantage of some of the things that you might see on the back end. Just if Florida can block Tennessee, they're going to eat them alive, just because there hasn't been enough development with the players. Even if again, the recruiting is similar to Florida, but I think we can all say at this point there's been a lot more success on the field for Florida's guys, and I expect to see that moving forward.
All right, before we move on to Auburn here, there we go, guys. You've got to try UFM underwear. And don't worry, you won't see me modeling out there on social media, anything like that. You don't need that. But what you do need is a pair of UFM underwear. Underwear for Men is the only brand of men's underwear that offers both isolation and support. Unlike other pouch underwear brands that have thin mesh panels or pre-sized pouches, Underwear for Men's patent pending design prevents skin-on-skin contact and eliminates chafing. UFM underwear is designed to move with your body so you can easily go from one activity to the next without ever having to think about your underwear. This state of Florida company has you covered no matter the activity. Everyday underwear, athletic underwear, work underwear, medical underwear. Underwear for Men is made for it all. Try your pair now. Head over to ufmunderwear.com and use promo code BREAKDOWN to get $5 off your pair of UFM underwear. UFM underwear. Support your manhood. Well, next up for the Gators in this kind of cycle of SEC teams here, an old-time rival in Auburn, and I think growing up in the '90s and all the down to the wire games against Terry Bowden in the mid '90s with Spurrier, Terry Bowden there, and Auburn breaking Florida's hearts a couple of times. Games you had to listen to on the radio because Auburn was on probation and you couldn't watch it on TV. So the only time if you saw it, you were there in the stadium. I remember the Zook overtime game as well against Auburn. Well, this is a matchup that I wish we got to see more.
Yeah, I mean, Auburn's fun, man. It just feels like there's a spark in the air when you play them. There's certainly, I was there a few years ago more than a few years ago now, but a while back when Auburn won a last second field goal and it was coming right at me, and obviously that was a little bit depressing. But
you didn't blow hard. You didn't blow hard enough.
Well, I'll blame my brother because he was sitting next to me. But yeah, I mean, Auburn again. Anytime you're playing one of the traditional powers in the SEC, it's a lot of fun, and it just has sort of like a unique feel to it because Florida and Auburn were rivals, but now it doesn't happen all the time. So it's just sort of, I guess it feels fresh, compared to some of the teams like we're going to talk about LSU next. That's somebody we play every year. This has a fresh feel to it, and I'm sure there are a lot of Gators fans who look at it and say this is the one I'd like to go to, just because it's something you can't see every year.
Yep, it is homecoming for the Gators there. So let's take a look at what the coaches have to say here. Auburn is the most talked about school in the league right now. Gus Malzahn is back calling plays again. Usually that works out pretty well for his teams. And if they get back to their old ways this year, I can bet you he won't give up play calling for the rest of his career. The bowl game versus Purdue was old school Gus Malzahn. It's all about the quarterback race here. That will define their season. We think it's wide open between quarterbacks on the roster, and don't think they won't start a true freshman either. Their offensive line was young last year and should be much improved. Wide receivers need work. There isn't a particular guy that knocks you over on tape. I think the big thing is how deep their personnel really goes. It's not the first level guys at Auburn. It's the second string. How much depth do they really have? I think their defensive talent is better than their offensive talent again this year, which for Malzahn is pretty strange. Derek Brown was their biggest returnee. Bringing him back kept a really great defense together. They could have the best defensive line in the nation if they stay healthy. Marlon Davidson and Nick Coe are NFL players. Now they could be talented enough to carry the offense. You can't say enough about what Kevin Steele has done with that defense. There's more pressure at Auburn than maybe anywhere else in the SEC because Alabama is your in-state rival. But this isn't really the season to make a call on Gus Malzahn unless the wheels completely fall off. They'd have to totally screw up the quarterback decision, and that is his strength. And last few thoughts here from coaches on the Lindy side of things. I think the Auburn people are fed up. They've never been a consistent big-time program, and they haven't played well the last 3 or 4 years. And they put in parentheses here, Auburn won the West in 2017. So if not for defensive coordinator Kevin Steele, they'd be sub 500. Kevin Steele has held that program together. They play good defense. All Gus does is blame the guy calling plays. Hell, then call the plays yourself. Why has their offense been inconsistent? Coaching. So one coach right there is not too high on Gus Malzahn. And then last little bit here on this coming up season, Auburn has a chance because they've got good returners on defense, particularly the defensive line and secondary. This could be their best defense in years. Offensive line is much better than it was this time last year. Running backs and wide receivers are pretty much the same. Jatarvius Whitlow could gain 1,000 yards if he stays healthy. So, Will, this was a team that going into last year was preseason top 10, fell on their face. So now this is years the expectations are tempered a bit in what seems like a do or die year for Gus Malzahn. But look, you go back and look at Auburn's history, and that's usually when Auburn surprises. Gus is back calling plays, and pair that with strong defense, and the Tigers could be a dangerous out for anybody on their schedule.
Absolutely. I mean, Auburn, when you just look at their recruiting, I mean, they've averaged 10.3, their national recruiting average, 4.5 in the conference. They should be perennially one of the top tier teams in the SEC. And I think that's why maybe you heard some of the negativity about Malzahn there. I mean, he took over in 2013, led them to the BCS championship game, and they lost that one. And ever since then, it's been basically mediocrity. I mean, 8-5, 7-6, 8-5. Then the year you mentioned in 2017, where they beat Alabama, got to 10-2, and then dropped the SEC title game against Georgia, and then lost to UCF in the bowl game. So, obviously not perfect there. And then 8-5 last year. So, I mean, if you were to look at the last 4 or 5 years, you'd say 8-5, 9-4. That's probably what you're looking at if you're an Auburn fan. And that's a good team, but not a great team. But certainly, anytime a team anytime a team's 9-4 in the SEC, that's a team that can beat you, and Florida's going to have to be wary of that.
Jarrett Stidham's gone at quarterback, and I think it's kind of it's pretty much a two-man race at quarterback. Joey Gatewood, who committed to Auburn when he was a sophomore from here in Jacksonville, played briefly in the bowl game last year. Gets compared to Tim Tebow, Cam Newton, a 6'5" quarterback, run first. But, a lot remains to be seen how good of a thrower he can be. I know Denny Thompson, the quarterback trainer here in Jacksonville, has been working with him, and he's high on his development so far. And then you have Beau Nicks. It's the first 5-star quarterback to sign with Auburn out of high school since Jason Campbell back in 2000. He broke all of Alabama high school career records for total yardage and touchdowns on his way to back-to-back state championships. So, Malzahn, he's kind of proven he can win with two different style of quarterbacks here. So, I don't necessarily think he favors one over another, with Gatewood kind of the power speed runner, and Nicks kind of the precise passer, can make all the throws on the field, but he can do it while he's scrambling. So, it may be a slow start with these guys, but it seemed like Malzahn has some good options when they open up versus Oregon, just no experience. So, whoever wins the job in the fall between Gatewood and Nicks should be able to rely on an improved run game and several, playmakers coming back at receiver.
Yeah, I think the big thing is that their entire offensive line's coming back. So when you're going to break in a guy who's a first-year starter at quarterback, whether it's Gatewood or whether it's Nicks or whether it's somebody else, that the fact that they've got those guys returning on offensive line is a big deal. You mentioned the opening game against Oregon, but then they've also, the 2 weeks prior to coming into Florida, they've got at Texas A&M and Mississippi State. So they may be kind of beat up coming into Gainesville. At the same time, they will have been battle tested at that point, right? Like they will have had Oregon, they will have had Texas A&M on the road where it's going to be loud. So, nothing in the swamp is going to intimidate them, I don't think. And so, I would expect them to sort of have their sea legs under them at that point. But again, they might not have a very good record coming in either, because they got a true freshman who started those sorts of games. And, the quarterbacks who've given Grantham trouble in the past have been guys who have experience where he can't necessarily confuse them with coverages. And that's what you're going to see in this game, is they're going to do a lot of stuff where they line up where the safety configuration early in the, before the snap is not what the defense they're actually playing. And I think you're going to see guys coming from all over the place. If this was a Randy Shannon defense, I'd tell you, hey, this might be a problem. But with Grantham, I think they're going to be coming from all over the place. And, one of the things is they are returning their entire offensive line, but last year their offense was 94th in yards per rush. That was their ranking against FBS opponents. So, Malzahn offense, you really think about them running the ball to set up the pass, and instead last year they relied on Stidham an awful lot. You wonder whether that reliance on Stidham is one of the reasons why Malzahn's calling plays this year, but he's really going to have to lean into that run game if he's going to make the offense hum, and we'll see whether he can do that.
Yeah, we've seen that offense, when that run game's going, it is a tough offense to defend. A lot of guessing going on the opposing defense. Auburn didn't have a 1,000-yard rusher last season for the first time since 2008. So a decade there with not having with having 1,000-yard rushers, and that came came crashing down last year. Inexperience, of course, at running back and offensive line last year kind of caused that. And now Malzahn's calling plays, and with 0 losses from the wide receiver position and the running back position, the running back position and the offensive line, you have to think the belief is that they'll get back there and probably getting a 1,000-yard rusher. The top candidate, sophomore Jartavius Booby Whitlow, averaged 5.3 yards per carry in an injury-riddled redshirt freshman season. They said he was the best offensive player in spring practice. So he'll be a leader for that backfield there. And at wide receiver, Darius Slayton and Ryan Davis, departures mean that, whoever is new starting quarterback will be without a go-to deep threat right now. And it's all-time leader in career receptions there in Ryan Davis. There's a bright future here there, but it's going to take some guys stepping up here. Sophomore Seth Williams, he averaged more than 20 yards per catch, and then fellow sophomore Anthony Schwartz, who could be the fastest player in college football. He came on strong second half of last season, but he's likely going to miss game 1 versus Oregon with hand surgery, so he should be good to go or sometime early in the season and before Auburn plays Florida. But they got Will Hastings and Eli Stove back from injuries that cost them the 2018 season. So Will just, I guess, a lot of potential at the skill positions, but not a lot of experience.
Yeah, I mean that's sort of the story of Auburn. I mean, they got 6 guys returning on offense, and 5 of them are on the offensive line. So there's not a lot of experience coming in, and they're going to have some growing pains. And the interesting thing is, if you look at last year, I actually looked originally and was like, oh, Auburn's offense wasn't too bad. They averaged over 30 points a game, and they had 400 points for the whole year. But then you look, and they had 63 points against Alabama State. Then they had 53 against Liberty, and then they had 63 against Purdue. And really, if you subtract those from their ledger, they then averaged 22 points a game on the other 10 games for the year. So that's McElwainian and Nussmeierian there, 22 points a game. So there's a reason why
Nussmeierian, the good new word, Nussmeierian.
Well, they probably were running play action on 3rd and 13 too. But so they weren't any good on offense last year, and that's really the hallmark of Malzahn. I mean, he's supposedly an offensive guru. Again, we talked about it a little bit with Tennessee. Is where's the thumbprint chain he's going to put on that program? Malzahn, he came in as an offensive guru. Obviously, that first year had some success, and he's got a rough job there, having to beat Alabama every year. But based on where they're at, they should be competitive with LSU every year, and that hasn't necessarily been the case. So I get why the natives are restless there. I would not be happy with the way Malzahn has run that program based on his recruiting if I were a fan. And I think the other thing is that they were, I think, 19th in points per game allowed last year on defense, but the underlying numbers don't necessarily support that. So there could be a reckoning coming this year a little bit.
Yeah, well, it won't be on the other side of the ball. And their defense, it starts up front, and it is nasty. Former 5-star Derek Brown, high 4-star Marlon Davidson, both decided to come back, who they easily could have went to the NFL. Junior Buck defensive end Nick Coe, he's versatile, led the team in sacks last year. He joins those guys, and given Auburn probably the best defensive line in college football heading into the 2019 season. Brown, All-American potential, already being talked about as a top 5 pick in next year's draft. Davidson and Coe, those guys coming off the edge there, lining up next to Brown in the interior. So a lot to like there along the defensive line for Auburn. The departed seniors at linebacker, Deshaun Davis, Darrell Williams, Montavious Atkinson, they accounted for 141 games played, 564 tackles, and 52 tackles for loss. So Auburn's really going to rely on that defensive front to kind of make up for what they lost there at linebacker. There's a lot of production going there. Juniors KJ Britt, Chandler Wooten, probably look to fill in there tandem for Auburn. They had strong springs and probably look to be the new leaders there. They have Zacoby McClain, a sophomore, kind of reputation for being a hard hitter there. And then only lose one starter, Jamel Dean from a secondary that gave up some big plays last year. So 4 starters back in a 5-man secondary, all kind of working around the safety duo of Jeremiah Denson and Daniel Thomas. Those guys were also the team's 2 leading tacklers. So kind of weird that the reputation that they get for that defensive line and their leading returning tacklers are in the secondary.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it depends on what you're really looking at when you're looking at the stats on defense. I mean, last year they were 15th in points per game against FBS opponents when you factor out the Liberties of the world and that sort of stuff. But they were 38th in yards per play. And the differentiation between those two, I think, indicates that they outperformed the expectations of what you would normally see. So typically your yards per play and your points per game are pretty even. And in this case, there's some indications that the defense wasn't quite as good as it showed on the field last year. And you wonder whether some of that had to do with maybe Malzahn being a little bit more conservative on offense, just because they weren't able to move the ball and slow things down and those sorts of things. But I'm high on their defense. I think their defense is going to be good. I don't know that it's going to be elite. This isn't something where I look at Miami's underlying stats and say Miami had a really good defense last year. I look at Auburn's underlying stats and I go, middle of the pack for the SEC is sort of what some of their underlying stats look like, and they're obviously returning a lot of experience, and that makes a difference. So I think they'll probably be one of the upper tier defenses in the SEC. But I'm not going to put them on par with Alabama or Georgia or maybe even Florida in that case. I think last year they weren't quite as good as maybe the points they allowed indicate.
All right, then after Auburn, the Gators would travel to Baton Rouge, and the big-time rival LSU, a game that has just gotten nastier as the years goes on, and you're fighting Joe Burrows there when the Gators travel to Louisiana and take on the Tigers. Tigers back-to-back there, Auburn and LSU for the Gators. First time I just really realized that there. So see what the opposing coaches have to say about LSU, as this will be our last team here in this SEC preview. Part 1 for the SEC, but part 2 overall, looking at the Gators opponents. So about LSU, this team could be their best chance to catch Alabama in a long time. You see athleticism and size everywhere. They're big and strong on both lines. They're going to be physical all over, competing the way those Pete Carroll USC teams did. I don't know where the heck they get that, but okay. That's what Ed Orgeron wanted to build. Joe Burrow is the best quarterback to play for the Tigers in a long time, and he's definitely one of the SEC's best returning quarterbacks. His development will change that offense. He barely knew the system when he got the job last year, and they hit him because of it. You don't ask a quarterback to win or lose you a game when you're talented everywhere else. Come on, they weren't talented that everywhere else. I want to know who this coach was. They do not have running backs like they used to have. Okay, I'll keep going. They should have enough starting talent at running back for at least 2 SEC teams. Foster Moreau was a great tight end. They don't have anyone like that to replace him. Great linebacker play, even with Devon White being gone. Patrick Queen came in for him versus Alabama after a late targeting call versus White and did really well. Solid secondary play still on the roster despite them losing a lot to the NFL. They recruit really well at that position. The focus will be on the offense and what new offensive guy former Saints assistant Joe Brady brings in. Expect some newer stuff passing. I know they're talking about installing RPO, but they still want to smash you running the ball. And if you have the bigs, that's what you do in this league. And Ed has a history with his play callers. He doesn't stray too far away from what he's comfortable with, no matter what he says when he hires them. This is the best team Orgeron has had. If they expand the offense, they can beat anyone. Before I move on to the Lindy's, so yeah, I didn't agree with a whole lot of stuff there. And I want to go back to, and Ed has a history with his play callers. He doesn't stray too far from what he's comfortable with, no matter what he says when he hires them. That sounds a lot like Les Miles.
Well, I think Orgeron's done a halfway decent job. I don't think it's been terrible, but I think you made a crack about the talent, and they've had a national recruiting average of 7.3 and a conference ranking average of 3.5.
Okay, but come on, would you really put them up there with those USC teams?
No, absolutely not. USC had back-to-back Heisman winners.
Right. That
So,
was my point.
I mean, but these guys got to sell magazines, man. But they're selling hope. But I mean, I think anybody who watched that UCF game last year, and I watched because for the first time in my life I was an LSU fan because God, I just wanted them to shut up. So you're watching that game, and I'm sitting here going, God, I would commit suicide if I was an LSU fan. Like they're just pick sixes and stupid offsides penalties and false starts and all that sort of stuff. And I think it's reflected. They played 5 one-score games last year, and they went 3-2 in them. But 5 one-score games, that's a lot of games to be playing where one play one way or the other can really make or break your season. And I think that's reflective of coaching in some aspects, having to play that many games.
Interesting here for the Lindy's and their first coach. I thought Ed Orgeron did a nice job last year. He does a good job recruiting. He's one of them, Cajun. LSU doesn't always do a good job evaluating, but Ed's done a good job. Tennessee should have hired him after Lane Kiffin left after the 2009 season. He'd have done a hell of a lot better job than Derek Dooley or Butch Jones. If Ed had stayed at Tennessee, Tennessee would probably be the best program in the East right now. I want to know who that coach is who's saying that.
I think it's Ed Orgeron.
Well, we wouldn't be able to read it. LSU. Back us. On the offense, I like their quarterback, Joe Burrow. He's very efficient, though. He's very efficient and tough. Offensive coordinator Steve Ensminger does a good job putting him in situations where he can exceed, but LSU is still not where they would like to be on the offensive line. On defense, coordinator Dave Aranda is a consistently good coach, as good of a defensive coordinator as there is in the SEC. They're good enough defensively, but really, by their standards, not great. So, yeah, I mean, that's kind of what I'm pointing to here as well. I think LSU has good talent. I still don't think they're on par of past LSU teams, nowhere near the USC team that we're going with. They don't have the running backs. I don't think they had that traditional strong SEC. I mean, they have an SEC defensive line. They don't have a traditional LSU defensive line.
No, but last year their defense was pretty good. I mean, it was 24th in yards per play, 8th against the pass, and I think a lot of that is attributable to Delpit and some of the guys they have back there, and then 51st in yards per rush allowed. And so, they're pretty stout on defense. I think offense last year is really where you look at it and say this is why LSU struggles, or at least why they struggled when they were losing the 3 games they lost.
All right, and then so we'll start with the offense there before we wrap up here with LSU. And as I mentioned, they do bring in Joe Brady, who is an analyst with the New Orleans Saints. He brings a system kind of loaded with some quick throws, predicated on finding some favorable matchups. This is going back and reading some stuff. It's a system that Orgeron had won since he was in New Orleans under Sean Payton as an assistant coach. And the running backs also get more involved with the passing game here. Of course, that passing game is led by Joe Burrow. He played okay in the first half of the season. Didn't throw an interception until 2 in the Florida game. Did pretty good final third of the season there. So they kind of 16 touchdown passes, 5 interceptions, and 58% completion percentage, and 28, almost 2,900 yards passing. Okay stats, as we kind of mentioned, kind of similar to what Felipe Franks was able to do. But you could tell, go by watching him, they really rallied around him, starting as early as that Miami game where he made good plays, he made smart plays, not a lot of big plays. Those kind of came later on in the season. Pretty much when he started using his legs too, kind of much like Felipe Franks. But he is a smart quarterback and one tough guy. You mentioned that UCF game, Will, where he just got blasted. I don't even know how he really kind of came back from that and ends up leading LSU to a victory in the bowl game there. So I think the question is, how does he fit in this new, if they're bringing an RPO system there, how does he fit? Because you go back and read what some of those coaches said, they tried to hide him in an offense that he was learning. Well, if you're bringing Brady in and changing a lot of things, what does that mean for Joe Burrow?
Yeah, this is actually a really interesting question. So, I mean, obviously, Urban Meyer at Ohio State played an offense that had a bunch of read option and RPO things in it too. So, I don't know that it's necessarily brand new, but you are changing the system for a guy who was just probably getting comfortable in the system. And I think you could see that at the end of the year. We've talked a lot over the course of the summer about Felipe Franks and sort of the step he took from the South Carolina game forward and how much better he was in those four. And I think you see the same thing with Burrow. So he has 71% of his passes completed against Arkansas, 71% against Rice, then 66 against Texas A&M on the road, and then 62% against Central Florida in that bowl game, even though overall for the entire year he only completed 57.8% of his passes. So those last four, he really took a step forward. And in those last four, he also had 10 touchdowns and 1 interception, and he only had 16 and 5 for the entire year. So, I think you could see Burrow sort of learning the offense and taking a step forward in much the same way we saw happening with Franks last year. But obviously, Franks has Mullen for year 2 as his offensive coordinator, and Burrow has a new offensive coordinator. So it'll be interesting to see whether he's able to pick those things up and whether the comfort level that he has just from being a starter is able to sort of carry through from the last 4 games last year.
Yeah, and they bring in Brady, but it's still Steve Ensminger who is the offensive coordinator. So how do those two guys work together and then kind of filter that down into Joe Burrow is kind of just an interesting storyline to watch there. And it'll be interesting. They play Texas early on in the season, and then they'll have Florida about midway there. So Joe Burrow kind of watching his progression throughout the beginning of the season until they play Florida will be definitely something to keep an eye on. Running back Nick Brissett leaves a pretty strong senior season last year. He rushed for 14 touchdowns, more than 1,000 yards, but they do have Junior Clyde Edwards-Helaire, 5'7", 210, more of a elusive style kind of running back. He's going to step in for more of a feature role here. 658 yards, 7 touchdowns last year. Leonard Fournette's little brother, Leonard Fournette, he'll be counted on as well. At the wide receiver position, junior Justin Jefferson, legit SEC guy there, led the team. 54 catches, 875 yards, 6 touchdowns. 6'2", 190 pounds, tough guy. Former top 100 recruit Jamar Chase. They love what they saw from him in the spring. He had a solid debut season last year, 23 catches, 313 yards. Derek Dillon's back, 22 catches, 307 yards. He may be the fastest guy there in that group. So plenty of options at wide receiver for LSU. They go pretty deep there. They do lose tight end Foster Moreau. He'll have to find a replacement there. And LSU only loses one player from last year's offensive line, finished second to last in the SEC in sacks, and they allowed a lot of tackles for loss last year. So need a lot of improvement there, as one of the coaches said in the previews that we just read. So, there's a lot of some experience coming back, but they definitely need to raise their game up front for LSU. That's kind of was going when we were talking about what those coaches were saying and kind of just reading the running backs and the offensive line for LSU. They just still don't look like that, tough-nosed LSU offense. But in a way, that's what held them back for so long, is because they tried to stick with that formula for so long. So now seeing what they have at receiver and with Joe Burrow, I think that the change for offense is definitely good for them, because I don't think they have that same kind of offensive line. They definitely don't have the same type of running backs that we're used to seeing for years at LSU.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it comes down to efficiency. They weren't very efficient last year. So they were 87th in yards per rush against FBS opponents. Now, obviously, they have 4 guys returning on the offensive line. And like you mentioned, some of the running backs they've got returning in Brissett and Edwards-Helaire. And then Burrow also had 400 yards rushing as well. But, Brissett averaged 4.3 yards per rush. Edwards-Helaire averaged 4.5. They ran the ball a lot. So, I mean, it was 386 carries between those two, and then another 128 from Burrow. They just weren't very efficient at it. I think, you really start looking at it and saying, I think in some capacity, they probably need to be a little bit more balanced. Say 379 passing attempts and well over 600 rushing attempts. And so that, I think, maybe is the area where you see a change this year in their offense as they get more balanced in terms of just not trying to run the ball as much, because like you said, they don't necessarily have the personnel to do it. But more than that, it's like, if you run the ball well, you're going to average 5 yards a rush. if you pass the ball well, you should average 8 or 9. And so just from the standpoint of moving the ball down the field, the passing game has to be the way that you do that if you're going to beat teams like Alabama and Georgia and even Florida. And I think you saw that last year when the much hyped game between LSU and Alabama turned into an Alabama whitewash because LSU became one dimensional and then Burrow wasn't able to carry him. And I think you see the same thing this year in games. If you can make them one dimensional and make them inefficient running the ball, they're still going to try. But if you can make them inefficient, then Burrow is going to have to pick up the slack. And I think he's a really good player. I'm not sure he's the player. At least he didn't demonstrate last year that he was the type of player who could pick up the slack when the running game isn't doing its job.
Yeah, I think just because of Burrow and a lot of the talk, we're comparing Felipe Franks and all that. I just think the progression of Felipe Franks, Joe Burrow, Kellen Mond at Texas A&M, those three guys, whoever progresses more there out of those three guys, I think you definitely can look for big seasons for their teams. Which one can take the next big step? I think they all three take steps. Which, how big is that step for all those three quarterbacks there? It's, I think, one of the major SEC storylines that maybe not getting talked about enough there. So moving to defense, they allowed just 339 yards and 22 points per game last year. 8 starters and 7 of the top 9 tacklers are back to overcome the loss of linebacker Devon White, cornerback Greedy Williams. Pass rush was pretty good last year. Run defense was okay. The secondary was killer and should be again, much like Florida. They use that DBU moniker there. So a lot of talent coming back there as well. A lot of defensive linemen were limited or out in the spring, including leader Rashad Lawrence. He dominated Fiesta Bowl win against UCF. He should be recovered from a knee injury by preseason camp. Also, Brandon Feheko, he started 8 games in 2018 before biceps injury. Kept him out for spring there. Junior Neil Farrell, solid backup. He was out of spring with a shin injury. So LSU's got to get healthy for some guys who missed spring, but some guys who played last year as well. Devon White, you could say, probably one of, if not, best linebacker LSU's ever had. He's going to the NFL. They do get back Caleb Von Chasen, the great pass rusher. He tore his ACL last year in the opener against Miami, so he missed last year. High praise for him dating back to last year. Then if you go to defensive backfield, Greedy Williams left, but LSU, they recruit DBs. We know that. Christian Fulton, he sat out the NCAA drug test suspension last year. They get him back. He'll be highly thought of by the time we get around and see him when Florida travels to Baton Rouge. Early enrollee, 5-star Derek Stingley. He's expected to start for LSU. Kind of, just like Florida does. They'll roll in a freshman DB and just keep on chugging away. 6'2", 200 pounds. He got on campus early, Will. He was actually able to take in part bowl practices, go through the spring as well. So he's got to practice a lot for LSU. Many people are even saying he'll be better than Patrick Peterson. They're one of LSU's best DBs. Grant Delpit, safety, one of the better players in college football. He's back, 74 tackles, 9.5 tackles for loss, 5 sacks, 5 interceptions last year for him.
Yeah, Delpit's a really, really good player. I think it's probably a little bit premature to call Stingley Patrick Peterson. I think, Patrick Peterson, really, really, really good DB. Sort of like earlier when you were comparing the Auburn quarterback Gatewood to Tebow. It's like, all right, I guess we got to do that based on size, but a size and an awkward throwing motion or something. And he's the next Tebow.
And from Jacksonville. So there we go. That's where the comparisons are stopping.
I get it. But it's the same thing with Stingley and Patterson, right? Stingley may be a really, really good player, but he's still young, and 5-stars still make mistakes just like 4-stars and 3-stars do. If you bust a coverage, it doesn't matter how fast you are, except for maybe if you can recover just in time if there's a bad throw or something like that. I think when we look at the LSU defense, there's a couple things. They got 7 guys returning on defense. They were 39th last year in points per game allowed against FBS opponents, but they were 24th in yards per play. So I mentioned that Auburn's defense, the underlying numbers indicated they weren't quite as good as what they had on the field. Well, LSU, or what they allowed in terms of points, LSU's the opposite. They probably allowed more points than you would expect, and some of that comes down to turnovers. Some of that comes down to to field position and things like that. When you can't run the ball, you can't necessarily pin the other team deep. But, some of that I think just comes down to luck as well. And so I expect the defense to probably take a step forward when it comes to how many points they're giving up, just because of the underlying numbers. But, again, that means if Burrow steps up and the defense is better, this is a team that can be really, really, really good. And I think the other things we have to take into account are that Florida's going to be playing them on the road. It's going to be the second game in that 4-game stretch where Florida will have played Auburn right before and is going to be looking at Georgia coming up after that. Whereas, the two prior for LSU is at Vanderbilt and Utah State at home. So they should be rested coming up into this one, and Florida's going to have to bring its best game.
Yeah, I think so. Looking at it on the surface, it's Florida's second toughest game of the season, behind Georgia. So that trip to Baton Rouge and an improving LSU team there. You do look at and seeing a lot of preseason polls, LSU getting a whole lot more love than Florida. I don't necessarily know. I get where the big gap is coming from. Sometimes you'll see LSU up in a 4 or 5 slot and Florida 8, 10. I mean, I know that's only a few slots, but they're getting a lot more praise than Florida is. Coming up, in preseason magazines and polls, and preseason polls that'll be coming out soon there too. So, we'll see. As I said, there's definitely Florida's second toughest opponent as it stands right now, going into the season. All right, Will. Yeah. Okay, good.
No, I was just going to say, I think some of that might have to do with the non-conference schedule. They don't necessarily have the, Florida's got Miami and Florida State. Certainly LSU has Texas, but they've also got Georgia Southern, Utah State, and just at the end of the day, they're and Northwestern State. So at the end of the day, there's some cupcakes in there, especially before they take on Florida, right? So Georgia Southern, then at Texas, then Northwestern State, at Vanderbilt, and Utah State before they come to Florida. So, that Texas game obviously is tough, but Florida is sort of the start for them in terms of playing those games. And you can anticipate that they may be 5-0 when Florida comes to town if they're able to take care of business against Texas, and it'll be a heck of a showdown because Florida's probably going to be right up there too.
Always a fun game there. So that'll be definitely. I mean, I don't know. It's just one of those games, Will, where it's just lately every time we play LSU, it's always crazy. There's always big storylines, big plays just waiting to happen. Last year it was the Brad Stewart giving Joe Burrow his first interception thrown. It was returned back for a pick six. Just as a fun game and one to look forward to as we wrap up this episode and looking at what these teams can do. But that LSU game would definitely be key.
Absolutely, man. It's always the fulcrum for the season. Tells you whether it really sort of gives you an idea of where Florida sits as a team and kind of where LSU sits as a team as well. So, part of it's that you're halfway through the season. Part of it is that, typically these are two of the better teams in the SEC. And, that's what you want, man. By the time you get to this point, Florida's in the teeth of its schedule, and we're going to be having a lot of fun just because it's going to be quality football.
Absolutely. All right. That'll do it for this episode of Gators Breakdown. We take a look at the first 4 SEC opponents for the Gators. Next up on the next episode, when we'll be taking a look at the opponent previews for the Gators: South Carolina, Georgia, Missouri, Vanderbilt, and Missouri. There, so in the order Florida will play them. So that'll be a fun one as we take a look at South Carolina, Georgia, 2 SEC East foes there. Well, hey, I guess they're all 4 SEC East teams. Yeah, Florida will go on the SEC East streak to end the season there, Will.
Hey, man, as long as it's 4-0, I don't care who they're playing.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, the two West teams back-to-back and then a 4-game SEC East streak to end the conference schedule there. So, Will, anything else?
Nah, man, just looking forward to it, chomping at the bit, and can't wait for the season to get started.
Yeah, the season previews give us a lot to learn about these teams. So it definitely makes me look forward to the season a little bit more and starting a new streak against Kentucky.
The start of 31 more, Dave.
There we go. That is Will Miles. You can find him on Twitter at Will Miles SEC and his site readandreaction.com. I'm the host of Gators Breakdown, David Waters. You can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SEC. Guys and girls out there, thanks for listening to this episode of Gators Breakdown.